Hillsborough for 23 years now. In 1989, 96 people died, well 95 and one subsequently died. Last month, 23 years on, there was a report which was really quite shocking to a lot of people. But to the people who'd been close to Hillsborough, it wasn't shocking at all, because we'd known for 23 years what had gone on. The reason we knew that was because so many people were at the football match and so many people experienced it. They were witnesses, they were rescuers, and so you might think that they were the people who would be sought out to give evidence in legal procedures. Far from it. Not only if they were credible witnesses were they not allowed to give evidence at the inquest, for example. They were vilified in the media for years. They caused the disaster as drunken, ticketless fans. And the reason the media could do that was because immediately after the disaster, South Yorkshire Police set up a little team to actually, what Maria Eagle has called a black propaganda unit, to actually disseminate information as to what had caused the disaster, the establishment version of events. And it's taken 23 years for that to be proved a lie. In the ensuing years, there have been suicides, so many people are still traumatized, but the tragedy is that none of this need have happened. The disaster needn't have happened, it was totally unnecessary, avoidable, but nevertheless it's a fact, it did happen. Everything that happened for the next 23 years was totally unnecessary and avoidable. And the blame has to be laid fairly and squarely at the door of the establishment, at the door of numerous governments. Yes, the police are to blame, but they did act with impunity. They behaved in a way which was totally acceptable. When you put Hillsborough in the context of the 80s, it has to be put in the context of working class struggle and a direct attack on the working class by the government of Margaret Thatcher. In particular, whilst there was a negative reputation around football supporters, there was an even more negative reputation around Liverpool people and the city of Liverpool specifically. What you had at Hillsborough was the combination of Liverpool and footballers, Liverpool supporters, and that was to prove a deadly combination, quite literally, because it was easy to demonise the working class. It was even easier to demonise Liverpool football supporters. And what made it even more acceptable was it happened in the region of South Yorkshire. There was no way that Margaret Thatcher was going to let South Yorkshire Police be held accountable and responsible for what happened at Hillsborough. This was payback time for the support they'd given her for breaking the miners' strike. Let's make no mistake about that. And I say that with some authority because as someone who sat through all the inquests all those years ago, I stood and watched senior officer after senior officer. That was their proud boast of how they were used to policing crowds like this on the 15th of April, because they policed the miners, and some of them had policed the poll tax demonstrations. So that was their proud boast. They were used to these crowds. And when they say these crowds, we know what they meant. This is how you police working class people. What you've seen since the report has come out last month, as I say, is what some of us have known for years. And the reason we weren't surprised, because although we knew it, we went about and we got the evidence. And a lot of the evidence that was produced recently, that people could have lived, that police officers changed statements, had been in the public domain for a long time. Because we took that when I worked with 6 families going to the High Court in 1993 to judicially review the inquest verdicts, to quash the inquest verdicts. We took that information to 3 High Court judges and we said people could have lived. And we gave them the evidence of probably the most eminent pathologist in Europe at the time, Dr. Ian West. And they rejected his evidence. And they also rejected the evidence that police statements could have been changed. And we always knew we'd lose, because we knew it would be a political decision, not a legal one. Nevertheless, we carried on, and I think this is, you know, if I'm here representing the Hillsborough Justice Campaign today, it's with one clear message: not to give up, because this all happened in a context where people weren't demonstrating, where it was very difficult to get people out on the streets, and where there was a climate after a certain time of saying, oh, you're not still going on about that, are you? Why don't you just go away and get on with your life? Well, I can say, as someone who wasn't directly affected by Hillsborough in as much as I didn't lose anybody, and I'm not a survivor, although I knew many of my friends who were there. I knew in the course of becoming friends with so many families and survivors from the early days when I monitored the inquests after Hillsborough, I had a taste of that when I was followed around Sheffield by West Midlands Police, the investigating officers, when my flat was broken into, and as a single parent I lived with my young child at the time, and the only thing stolen was my address book. When my phone was tapped and the families of 6 other families going for judicial review, I knew the kind of pressure that is put on people who challenge the system, and clearly that was done to make us go away. But like you people, we're made of sterner stuff, and we showed we wouldn't go away. And there was challenge after challenge on our rights. When the family support group took private prosecutions against the 2 officers, the 2 main officers involved on the day, our campaign was actually brought before the High Court and threatened with imprisonment if we launched our website, which actually just told the truth. If you look at it, you will see it told information years ago that is in the public domain now via the report. We were told we couldn't demonstrate, we couldn't protest, we couldn't be in Leeds, where the case was, in groups of more than 2. And this was just because we were attending to support the private prosecutions. So I say these things to highlight how systematically over 23 years, people's rights have been eroded, and had we been made of less sterner stuff, we would have gone away. And the only thing that has stopped Hillsborough campaigners has been death. And sadly along the way we have lost a lot of our support through premature deaths of people suffering because of the trauma of the lies told about their loved ones. You might have read in today's Observer that now the number of those who could have survived, which was stated as 41 by the recent report, is in effect more likely to be 58. 58 people could have lived. Well, I say here and now, 96 people could have and should have lived, because there was no need at all for that disaster. It happened because football supporters in the 80s were treated like animals. They were herded like animals and corralled. The language was animal terminology, and that is how people were treated. And they were treated that way partly with the view to bringing in ID cards. And if Hillsborough did anything, the one positive that came out of it was that that was actually scrapped. But let's not forget the first report into Hillsborough, which was the Taylor report, which was carried out very quickly, that inquiry after Hillsborough. Lord Justice Taylor's findings that the cause of the disaster was the breakdown of police control. Unequivocally, that was the cause, yet Margaret Thatcher refused to accept that because she said no way could the police be held responsible. What message would that send out to the public? Well, I tell you, the message it sends out is that the police are corrupt and they've lied, and there's no greater example of that than looking at the Hillsborough report that has recently been published to show the lengths they go to. And if there's any doubters in the room who think, well, they wouldn't do that, they wouldn't go to those extremes, let me assure you they would. And the extremes they went to in covering up that disaster is now crumbling around them, and the domino effect is happening, and they are all blaming each other now. You see now, in terms of the IPCC report on Friday, that they're going to launch a complete independent investigation. Well, right away, you know, obviously, we know we have suspicions totally around the notion of independence. But what they do, they're doing that in relation to South Yorkshire Police and West Midlands Police, and also West Yorkshire Police in relation to Norman Betterson. Norman Betterson was part of that elite team that put out that black propaganda about Liverpool fans. As if that wasn't bad enough, and as if, you know, to rub salt in the wounds, and this shows you how all-encompassing the police are. He was later appointed Chief Constable of Merseyside. We had to put up with him as our Chief Constable. We petitioned and brought a 15,000 signature petition to the police authority, and we had a sit-in at the police authority the day he was appointed. Nevertheless, they did appoint him, and that was the contempt that the police generally have for people who protest. That man now is on his way out, no doubt about it, and I have no sympathy for him. My only concern is that he seems to be the one officer being named now, when we know it goes beyond him to other police forces. And let's not forget that the West Midlands Police, the man who acted as the coroner's officer, they all acted as coroner's officers, as the investigating officers, but the one who sat and was the coroner's right-hand man was a man called Stanley Beachy, who was a former head of the Serious Crime Squad, the same crime squad that put away the Birmingham Six for 17 years. This man and this police force was brought in for its expertise. Its expertise was corruption and cover-up. It was no coincidence that they were the examining force. So whilst I think it's so important that today my presence here is really to say to you, don't give up, because if the Hillsborough families, at the height of their despair, when their grief and their vulnerability was exploited by the establishment, they stuck with it, and there have been many dark times, and it can take 23 years. We've seen from Bloody Sunday families a lot longer than that, and they were our inspiration for many years. I would like to offer our support to Alfie and other people here today, because some people on the platform, I know I've shared platforms with Janet before, and it is only by coming together and uniting campaigns and showing commonality that we will defeat what is a very corrupt society we live in. The only way we can carry on now, we still haven't got justice, is political pressure. Any legal stuff will come after, but unless we keep the political pressure on, because nothing has changed, there's still 96 accidental death verdicts recorded against the dead. So what I would say in conclusion is that we are happy to join forces, because I certainly see this in the wider scale of the society we live in, and it is only by getting out there and protesting. Had we been denied that, had we given in when pressure was put on us, you wouldn't have had the truth that is out now in respect of the corruption of police in respect to Hillsborough. Thank you very much.